The car dealership smelled like greed and lemon polish. Jazz Carrington knew the moment she walked in. The way the salesman's eyes crawled over her ripped jeans and durag. The way his smirk said thrift store before his lips even moved. "This model costs more than your life savings, sweetheart." She almost laughed. If only he knew her life savings could buy this place twice. But when she reached for the Ferrari's door handle, security appeared like magic. Get out, big mistake. By tomorrow, her billionaire father would own this dealership, and every smug employee would beg to keep their jobs. But Jazz had no idea this was just the first domino, and the next one had her name on it. From which country are you enjoying this story? Make sure to tell us in the comments.
The air inside the dealership smelled like artificial lemon and ambition. It was the kind of place where men in stiff suits shook hands too hard and laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. The floors gleamed like they'd been polished with the tears of people who'd been talked into 7-year loan terms. And the cars, shiny, silent, and smug, sat under lights so bright they looked like they were about to be interrogated. She hadn't even touched one yet. That was the funny part. All she'd done was walk in. Just walked in, same as anybody else. The automatic doors had hissed open like they'd been waiting for her, and she'd stepped inside like she belonged there, which, technically, she did. More than most. But they didn't know that. They only saw the ripped jeans, the do-rag, the chipped nail polish, the way she carried herself like she wasn't impressed by any of it. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was thinking they'd let her get as far as the steering wheel. A man materialized in front of her before she'd taken 5 steps into the showroom. Mid-40s, hair gelled into submission, a tie knotted so tight it looked like it was punishing him. His name tag said, Greg. His expression said, "You're in the wrong place." "Can I help you?" he asked, in a tone that suggested helping was the last thing he wanted to do. She smiled. Sweet as poison. Just looking. His eyes flicked over her, not the kind of look that lingered on a person. The kind that priced them. "We have pre-owned vehicles in the back lot. More in your range." She didn't move. "I like this one." It was a Ferrari. Fire engine red, the kind of car that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. The leather seats probably cost more than Greg's mortgage. His mouth flattened. "This model starts at $300,000. She tilted her head. "And a beat." Then his voice dropped, low enough that the couple browsing the Teslas nearby wouldn't hear. "Look, I don't want any trouble. But this really isn't the place for you." She could have told him then. Could have laughed in his face and pulled up her bank app and watched his expression crumble. But where was the fun in that? Instead, she reached for the door handle. Greg's hand shot out, not quite touching her, but close enough that she felt the heat of his skin. "Don't." She froze. Not because he'd stopped her. Because he'd dared to. Slowly, she turned her head to look at him. "You ever heard of a lawsuit?" His lip curled. "You ever heard of trespassing?" Around them, the showroom hummed with quiet conversations and clinking glasses. A salesman laughed too loudly at something a client said. Somewhere, a coffee machine gurgled. And in the middle of it all, Greg stood between her and the car, his chest puffed out like he'd just saved the world from some great threat. Her phone was already recording. Had been since he'd said, "We have pre-owned in the back." She took a step back, holding up her hands. "All right. I get it." Greg's shoulders relaxed. He thought he'd won. She turned and walked out, the automatic doors sliding shut behind her with a sound like a sigh. Outside, the sun glared down on the parking lot. She yanked off the do-rag, shaking out her curls, and pulled out her phone. 3 rings. Then, "Who do I need to sue?" The voice on the other end was calm. Amused, even. Like this was a conversation he'd been expecting. She grinned. "Oh, you're gonna love this." The sun had barely risen when Jazz's phone buzzed itself off the nightstand. She groaned, fumbling for it with sleep-numb fingers. The screen glared at her, *6:17 a.m*, and the caller ID made her sit up straight. "Pops." She swiped to answer. You realize normal people sleep past 6, right? Normal people don't own car dealerships. His voice was smooth, the way it always got when he'd already won something. Get dressed. We have a meeting. She rubbed her eyes. What meeting? At your new company. The line went dead. Jazz stared at her phone, then at her closet, then at the half-empty bag of tacos on her dresser that had been last night's dinner. This was not how she'd planned to spend her Saturday. The Uber ride over was long enough for her to replay yesterday's disaster in her head. Greg's smug face. The way his voice had dipped into that fake polite tone rich people used when they were trying to other you. The security guard who'd materialized like a poorly dressed ghost the second Greg snapped his fingers. She'd been embarrassed, then pissed, then strategic. Her phone had caught every second. But Pops didn't need footage. All he'd needed was the story. And now, the Uber slowed. Jazz looked up. The dealership loomed ahead, all glass and ego. Same as yesterday. Except today, the parking lot was packed with black SUVs and a handful of nervous-looking employees huddled near the entrance. One of them was Greg. Jazz's stomach did a little flip. This was going to be fun. Inside, the showroom had been transformed. The champagne cart was gone. The easy-listening Jazz had been replaced by silence. And at the center of it all, standing like a king in front of a $500,000 Bugatti, was Darius Carrington. He didn't look like a man who'd just bought a business on a whim. He looked like a man who'd done it 100 times before. He had. Jazz took her time walking over. Let the employees sweat. Let Greg's face do that weird twitchy thing it was doing. Let her father wait. You're late, Darius said. She checked her phone. By 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes of my time you wasted. He turned to the room. Everyone, meet your new boss. A beat. Wait, her? Greg's voice cracked. Darius smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Problem. Greg opened his mouth, closed it. His face cycled through approximately 7 emotions before landing on oh shit. Jazz let the silence stretch. Then she walked up to the Ferrari she'd been eyeing yesterday, the one Greg had lost his mind over her touching, and ran a hand along the hood. Keys, she said. A salesman scrambled forward. Greg looked like he might throw up. The leather seat of the Ferrari was colder than Jazz expected. She traced a finger along the stitching, the red interior smelling like wealth and factory sealant. The salesman, asterisk not Greg, never Greg again asterisk, hovered at the driver's side door, keys dangling from his shaking fingers. You want me to, start it for you? His voice cracked. Jazz didn't look up. I know how to turn on a car. A nervous chuckle. Right. Of course. Just, the engine's kind of sensitive, so maybe. The roar of the ignition cut him off. The entire showroom flinched. Jazz watched in the rearview mirror as Greg's face went pale. Darius didn't react. Just checked his watch. We're burning daylight. The tour no one wanted. They walked the dealership like conquerors surveying fallen land. Darius moved with purpose, pausing only to ask questions designed to make people squirm. Asterisk, why are these floor plans outdated? Asterisk. Asterisk, who approved these financing terms? Asterisk. Asterisk, explain this dip in Q3 revenue. Asterisk. Jazz followed, silent, watching as managers tripped over their words. The scent of panic was thick, expensive cologne undercut with sweat. Then they reached the back offices. Darius kicked open a supply closet. Inside, a man in a rumpled suit was shredding documents. Oops, Jazz said. The first real lesson. Darius didn't fire the guy on the spot. Worse, he made Jazz sit through the interrogation. Turns out, the dealership had been cooking the books. Skimming from down payments. Fudging inventory. Greg's boss, now hyperventilating into a paper bag, had been running a side hustle with the used car inventory. See how the numbers bleed? Darius tapped a spreadsheet. Amateur hour. If you're gonna steal, at least cover your tracks. Jazz frowned. That's your takeaway? Lesson 1, Jasmine. Money's a game. These people. He gestured to the weeping manager. They don't know the rules. Greg's last stand. She found him by the employee lockers, stuffing his belongings into a duffel bag. You happy now? Greg spat. Got your little revenge? Jazz leaned against the lockers. Not yet. He slammed the metal door. I was doing my job. You walked in looking like. Like what? She stepped closer. Say it. Greg's jaw worked. He didn't. Jazz smiled. That's what I thought. The parking lot warning. She was halfway to her Uber when Greg grabbed her arm. Listen, he hissed. You think this is about me? About some racist crap? His grip tightened. Your daddy just bought himself a war. Jazz yanked free. What's that supposed to mean? But Greg was already walking away, tossing one last phrase over his shoulder. Ask him about the real owner. The blueprints were still spread across her father's desk when Jazz heard the garage door open. She froze, one hand hovering over the strange notation, Lockerbie, scrawled in her father's tight handwriting across the dealership blueprints. The numbers beside it made no sense. $4.7M, 72H, D.C. Headlights washed across the study windows. Jazz snapped a quick photo with her phone before carefully rearranging the papers exactly as she'd found them. The kitchen door opened just as she was pouring herself a glass of orange juice, the picture of late-night innocence. You're up late. Darius stood in the doorway, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder. There was a speck of blood on his collar. Jazz pretended not to notice. Couldn't sleep, she said, taking a slow sip. Business. He set his briefcase on the counter with a heavy thud. The locks clicked open to reveal stacks of $100 bills, still banded from the bank. Tomorrow's payroll. Jazz nearly choked. You keep payroll in cash? Only when the banks ask too many questions. He gave her that look, the one that said don't ask. The same look he'd given her when she was 12 and found the unregistered handgun in his nightstand. The refrigerator hummed in the silence. Greg said something weird today, Jazz ventured. Darius didn't look up from counting stacks. Greg's unemployed. His opinions don't matter. He mentioned the real owner. The rubber band around one money stack snapped. Darius moved slowly, deliberately, placing the cash back in the briefcase. When he finally met her eyes, his expression was dangerously calm. There are two kinds of people in this world, Jasmine. Those who own things. He snapped the briefcase shut. And those who think they do. The next morning, dealership. The service bay smelled like oil and lies. Jazz pretended to inspect a lifted Ford F-150 while watching the mechanics through the windshield reflection. They moved differently around Bay 3, quicker glances, tighter shoulders. One kept checking his phone like expecting bad news. Find what you're looking for? She turned to find the service manager, Carlos, according to his name tag, wiping his hands on a rag that had never been clean. Just browsing. She patted the truck's fender, thinking about getting something durable. Carlos's smile didn't reach his eyes. Smart. Flashy cars break easy. He nodded toward Bay 3. We got a Silverado back there with armored plating. Former DA vehicle. Now that's a sales pitch. The bay door opened before she could press further. Greg walked in. Not fired. Not banished. Working. Their eyes met. His went wide. Carlos stepped between them. Greg's on retainer for specialty detailing. You got a problem with that? Jazz smiled sweetly. Just surprised he can fit his head through the door. The paper trail. Her father's accountant nearly had a stroke when Jazz showed up unannounced. Ms. Carrington, your father didn't mention. I need the Lockerbie files. The man's glasses slid down his nose. There's no. That's not. Don't. Jazz held up her phone, displaying the photo of the blueprint. We can do this the easy way, or I can call my father and tell him you've been obstructing his daughter. Sweat bloomed on his forehead. It's not what you think. Then explain it. The accountant looked both ways before whispering. The previous owners. They didn't sell willingly. The midnight meeting. The armored Silverado was parked behind a diner off I-95 when Jazz arrived. Greg sat in the driver's seat, tapping the wheel like a nervous metronome. You shouldn't be here, he said as she climbed in. You shouldn't be employed. Greg checked the mirrors again. Your father bought a poison chalice. The Lockerbie Group owned that dealership for 15 years through shell companies. They launder there. They kill there. Jazz felt ice down her spine. Prove it. He handed her a burner phone. The video showed a man in a dealership uniform hosing down Bay 3 at 3 a.m. The water ran pink. Every third Thursday, Greg said. Like clockwork. The choice. Darius was waiting when she got home. Out late, he observed from his armchair, a glass of bourbon catching the fireplace light. Jazz set the burner phone on the coffee table between them. Tell me I'm wrong. He didn't look at it. You always hated puzzles as a child. This isn't a game. No. He took a slow sip. It's an education. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner. Somewhere outside, a car backfired. Jazz picked up the phone. I could go to the police. Darius smiled. But will you? The smell of bleach hit her first. Jazz crouched behind a stack of oil drums, watching the service bay through a grimy window. The dealership had been closed for hours, but Bay 3 blazed with fluorescent light. A man in coveralls, not Carlos, someone new, hosed down the concrete floor, the water swirling toward a drain in the center. Her phone camera zoomed in. The runoff wasn't clear. A shadow moved across the bay. Jazz ducked as another figure entered the frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that cost more than most cars in the lot. He inspected the drain while the worker kept spraying, the two of them moving with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this before. The burner phone in her pocket vibrated. Get out now. Greg's message came through just as the suited man turned toward the window. Jazz caught a glimpse of a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw before she dropped below the sill. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The drain gurgled. Then, footsteps. The accountant's office was dark when Jazz picked the lock. She'd expected alarms. Maybe a safe. Instead, she found a filing cabinet with a sticky note that read, Lockerbie, do not file, in shaky handwriting. Inside, one manila folder. The top sheet was an invoice for 72H DC Transport Special Handling, dated last month. Amount, $47,000. Client, Lockerbie Holdings. Description, asterisk, vehicle retrofit, climate-controlled cargo compartment. Asterisk. Beneath it, a carbon copy of a bill of lading. Jazz's breath caught. Contents. Biological material, human origin. The interrogation. Greg didn't look surprised when she kicked in his apartment door. Just tired. You followed the money, he said, not getting up from his couch. The TV played muted infomercials. Knew you would. Jazz threw the invoice on his coffee table. Start talking. He lit a cigarette with steady hands. Your father bought a pipeline. That dealership's the last stop before DC. They retrofit the cars in Bay 3. Special compartments for organs, sometimes whole bodies. Rich people pay top dollar for fresh tissue. Bullshit. Greg exhaled smoke. Why do you think they needed someone like me? Young, white, forgettable. I made sure the right cars got tagged for service before they shipped out. Jazz's stomach turned. You're lying. He stubbed out the cigarette. Check the VIN logs. Look for repeat customers. Wealthy, sick ones. Then ask yourself why your father wanted this place so bad. The trap. Her father's study light was on when she got home. Jazz hesitated at the door, The invoice crumpled in her fist. Then she heard the voices. Tonight was too close. A stranger's voice, gravelly. She saw the cleanup. Darius sighed. She's curious. That's why I bought the damn place. You promised containment. I promised an education. A chair scraped. She'll learn the rules or she'll learn the consequences. Jazz backed away just as the door handle turned. The revelation. The VIN logs didn't lie. 3 Mercedes S-Classes had come through Bay 3 every month like clockwork. All registered to shell companies. All linked to private medical facilities. One name kept appearing. Dr. Elias Voss, Georgetown Transplant Institute. A quick search showed his last patient, a Saudi prince, had received a miraculous liver transplant 2 days after one of the Mercedes visits. The prince's donor. A Jane Doe hit-and-run victim from Baltimore. Jazz's hands shook as she cross-referenced dates. Every donor death matched a third Thursday. The decision. The text came at 3:17 a.m. Asterisk, meet me at the docks. Bring cash. I can get you out. Asterisk, Greg. Jazz stared at the message. Then at the gun in her father's nightstand. Then she began packing. Rain sheeted across the dockyards in silver curtains, turning the pavement into a black mirror that reflected the flickering halos of sodium lights. Jazz pulled her hood tighter as she moved between shipping containers, the duffel bag heavy with cash bouncing against her hip. Somewhere in the harbor, a ship's horn groaned, long and low like a dying animal. Greg stood beneath a flickering lamp, the collar of his cheap windbreaker turned up against the weather. He looked older in the yellow light, the lines around his mouth deeper than she remembered. You came. His breath fogged in the cold air. Jazz didn't move closer. Start talking. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Your father isn't who you think he is. That's your big reveal? She barked a laugh. I know what the dealership is. I know about the cars, the organs, the third Thursday cleanups. Greg shook his head. You know what he let you find. He reached into his jacket. Jazz had the gun out before he could blink. Don't. Slowly, he withdrew a water-stained ledger. Dr. Voss's records. Page 47. The wind tore at the pages as she flipped it open. Columns of dates, dollar amounts, and initials marched down the paper. DC, $2.3 million. CC. Her finger traced the entry dated 6 years prior. The night of her mother's car accident. The night they never found the other driver. The first betrayal. The safe house stank of mildew and stale cigarettes. Greg paced the stained carpet while Jazz sat very still, the ledger open on her knees. They needed a liver, he said. Type AB negative. Less than 1% of the population. Jazz remembered the hospital waiting room. The doctors saying we found a match right before midnight. The way her father had vanished for 3 hours and came back with blood on his cuffs. She'd thought it was hers, from when she'd clung to him sobbing. Your mother was already gone, Greg continued. But her organs. Voss had a buyer. Your father made the delivery himself. The pages crumpled in her grip. Prove it. He tossed a thumb drive onto the coffee table. Security footage from Georgetown ICU. Watch from timestamp 2317. The second betrayal. Rain tapped against the motel window like impatient fingers. The grainy footage showed her father walking into the hospital elevator, alone. Then, 18 minutes later, emerging with a cooler and 2 men in scrubs. The timestamp read 23:35. Her mother had been declared dead at 23:09. Jazz ejected the drive. Why show me this now? Greg's smile was bitter. Because I was the wheelman that night. And your father just put a hit out on me. Darius answered on the first ring. You're missing your morning meeting. Jazz watched the sunrise bleed across the docks. I know about Mom. Silence. Then softly, come home, Jasmine. You sold her parts. A chair creaked on his end. I saved lives with her gift. including yours. His voice hardened. That ledger is half the story. Greg's playing you. Then tell me the truth. The line went dead. She smelled the gasoline before she saw the men. Jazz was halfway to her car when the first Molotov shattered against the shipping container behind her. Flames roared to life, cutting off the exit. Greg grabbed her arm. This way. They ran between burning walls of cargo, the heat blistering the air. A gunshot rang out, then another. Greg stumbled, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. Go. He shoved her toward a gap in the flames. The blue container. There's... A third shot cut him off. He fell without another word. Jazz dove behind a forklift as shadows advanced through the smoke. One of them raised a phone to his ear. "It's done," the man said. Then, after a pause, "No, she wasn't with him." The blue container held two things. 1. A black Corvette with DC plates. 2. A folder labeled Project Lockerbie. Inside the folder, photos of her mother alive in a hospital bed, asterisk after asterisk the accident. And a single handwritten note. Asterisk, they made me choose. You or her. I will never forgive myself. DC asterisk. The engine roared to life as the container doors burst open. Jazz hit the gas as bullets pinged off the rear bumper. She didn't look back. The Corvette's GPS still had the clinic address programmed in. Jazz wondered how many midnight runs her father had made along this same route, the same headlights cutting through the same darkness, the same guilt gnawing at his gut. Georgetown Transplant Institute looked less like a hospital and more like a private spa. Low sandstone walls, tasteful landscaping, a fountain bubbling with what was probably sterilized water. Jazz parked in a physician's spot and approached the glass doors with her hood up and her father's stolen keycard in hand. The night receptionist barely glanced up. Delivery. Jazz tapped the card against the reader. Special cargo. The elevator required a retinal scan. She pressed the call button 3 times in quick succession, her father's override, and the doors slid open with a soft chime. Sublevel 3 smelled like antiseptic and something earthier beneath it. The hallway stretched too long, the fluorescents humming at a frequency that made her teeth ache. Room 7B was locked. Inside, the walls were lined with refrigeration units. Each bore a barcode and a date. The third unit from the left was older than the others. Dustier. The handle stuck when she pulled. Cold air rushed out as the drawer slid open, carrying with it the scent of chilled metal and something faintly organic. Inside lay a single stainless steel canister labeled with 3 letters that stopped her heart. ACC. Her mother's initials. The first lie. The canister contained 3 things. 1. A woman's gold wedding band, size 6, Tiffany setting. 2. A clinical report dated the day after the accident. Subject expired 2309. Harvest complete 2342. 3. A faded Polaroid of her mother sitting up in a hospital bed, gripping a pen like a weapon. Jazz turned the photo over. Asterisk. They're making him choose. Save the baby or save me. Tell Jasmine I. Asterisk. The rest was cut off by a bloodstain. Dr. Voss's office was unlocked. The good doctor slept at his desk, his cheek pressed against an open ledger, his fingers still curled around a glass of bourbon. Jazz took her time, flipping through files, photographing invoices, pocketing the small revolver from his desk drawer. She was reading a memo about Lockerbie Phase 2 when the intercom crackled. Asterisk, security to sublevel 3. Unauthorized access in cryo storage. Asterisk. Voss stirred. Jazz pressed the gun to his temple. Wakey, wakey, doctor. His eyes focused slowly, then widened. You look just like her. Voss talked fast. Faster when Jazz dumped the canister's contents on his desk. Your mother was already brain dead when we took the organs, he insisted. The photo, that was hours before the crash. Jazz flipped to a ledger page marked with red ink. Then why does this say, Live Harvest? The doctor's throat worked. There were complications. Try again. She cocked the hammer. Your father made a deal. Voss spat. The Saudis needed a liver, but the donor had to be a genetic match for their bloodline. Your mother was the only candidate. The office tilted. Jazz gripped the desk. She was targeted? Voss mopped his brow. The accident wasn't an accident. But your father, he negotiated. Her life for yours. For mine. You were 6 years old and needed a bone marrow transplant. Voss pointed to the photo. See the 4 in her arm? They were prepping her for donation when she woke up. Started writing those notes. Your father had to restrain her. Jazz tasted bile. And after, Voss looked away. He kept his word. You got the transplant. The Saudis got their liver. And I got a lifelong client. Dawn painted the Potomac gold when Jazz stormed into her father's penthouse. He stood at the window, staring at the water, a glass of bourbon in hand. The same glass, she realized, as in Voss's office. The same amber hue. You knew I'd find out, she said. Darius didn't turn. I counted on it. The gun felt heavy in her hand. All these years. You let me think she died instantly. Would the truth have helped you heal? Jazz aimed at his reflection. Who's next on your harvest list, Dad? Me. Finally, he turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, his collar undone. For the first time in her life, Darius Carrington looked old. No, he said softly. Just me. He unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a fresh surgical scar across his abdomen. Liver cancer. Stage 4. The gun wavered. I need an heir, Jasmine. Someone who understands the real family business. He stepped closer. The question is, are you ready to inherit it? The penthouse elevator dinged. Jazz didn't turn as the doors opened, didn't flinch at the sound of safeties clicking off behind her. Darius sighed. You should have taken the deal. Jazz smiled. Then pressed send on the burner phone she'd hidden in her pocket, transmitting every file, every photo, every damning ledger entry to 3 major news outlets and the FBI. Who said I didn't? The first bullet shattered the window behind them. The gunshot never came. Instead, the penthouse windows exploded inward as a black helicopter swooped past, its searchlight blinding. Jazz hit the floor as glass rained down, the wind howling through the shattered panes. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Darius moved faster than a man with stage 4 cancer should. He yanked open a wall panel, revealing a hidden staircase. Last chance, Jasmine. Jazz lunged for the ledger instead. Her father's expression hardened. Then he was gone, vanishing down the steps just as SWAT burst through the doors. The FBI interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Agent Morales, a wiry woman with a scar across her chin, slid a photo across the table. Dr. Voss was found an hour ago. Someone cut his throat with a bone saw. Jazz studied the crime scene image. Classy. Your father's signature. Morales leaned in. But here's what interests me. The doc's computer was wiped. Except for one file. She produced another photo. Jazz's breath caught. It showed a shipping manifest dated last week. 12/15, Lockerbie Holdings. Cargo. 24 units, pediatric. Jazz's hands trembled. Children. Not just any children. Morales tapped the photo. Genetically enhanced. IQ scores off the charts. We think your father's been brokering more than organs. The safe house was a crumbling brownstone in Anacostia. Jazz arrived at 3 a.m. to find Greg, very much alive, bleeding on a futon. You shot me, she said. He grinned through the pain. And you left me to burn. We're even. A teenage hacker named Rook looked up from 3 laptops. Your dad's files are encrypted with some next-gen shit. But I found something better. The screen showed blueprints for a facility in rural Virginia. Labeled Lockerbie Phase 3. Rook zoomed in on the basement level. That's not a hospital. It's a lab. The documents told a story. 1. Phase I. Organ harvesting, completed. 2. Phase 2. Genetic material collection, ongoing. 3. Phase 3. Cognitive transfer, trials, initiated. Jazz scrolled through test results. Brain scans. Psych evals. And a video file dated 2 days ago. The footage showed a child, maybe 10, solving advanced equations while hooked to an EEG. A man's voice off camera said, "Subject Gamma is ready for extraction." The child turned toward the camera. Jazz's blood turned to ice. It was her. At age 10. Greg grabbed her wrist. "This isn't just about selling kids, Jazz. They're copying them. Their memories. Their skills." Rook pulled up a bank statement. "Your father made a $20 million deposit last month from a biotech firm called Mnemosiny." The name rang a bell. Jazz fumbled for her phone, pulling up an old photo, her father cutting the ribbon at a research center. The sign behind him, Mnemosiny Institute for Cognitive Science. "Son of a bitch," Greg breathed. "He's not just trafficking geniuses. He's duplicating them." The burner phone buzzed with an unknown number. Jazz answered. "Come home, Jasmine." Her father's voice was frayed. "Before more people get hurt." Jazz watched Rook trace the lab's location. "You made copies of me?" A long silence. Then, "Only one. And she's dying." The line went dead. Jazz stared at the blueprints, at her own face staring back from the screen, at Greg's bandaged shoulder. Then she grabbed the car keys. "We're going to Virginia." The lab smelled like artificial pine and something underneath it, something metallic and wrong. Jazz pressed against the concrete wall, counting the seconds between security patrols. 15 steps. Pause. The squeak of rubber soles turning. Greg's breath was warm against her ear. "We've got 90 seconds before the next sweep." Rook's fingers flew across the tablet, disabling another camera. "Make it 60. Their system's rerouting faster than I expected." Jazz checked the schematic again. Third door on the left led to the restricted wing, where she supposedly was. The guard's footsteps faded. Jazz moved. Room 7B wasn't a cell. It was a perfect replica of her childhood bedroom. Same lavender walls, same worn copy of Alice in Wonderland on the nightstand, same faint lemon polish smell her mother used to love. The girl sitting on the bed looked up. Jazz's stomach lurched. Same round cheeks. Same stubborn chin. Same scar above the left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike at 7. "Took you long enough," the girl said. Her name was Gamma. She knew all of Jazz's memories up to age 12. The bike accident. Her mother's laugh. The way Darius always smelled like sandalwood and bourbon. "What are you?" Jazz whispered. Gamma rolled up her sleeve, revealing an 4-port. "A backup." "For what?" The girl's smile didn't reach her eyes. "For when the original breaks." The files in Gamma's nightstand told the real story. Project Mnemosiny. Not memory transfer. Consciousness transfer. Phase 3 Trial 47. Subject Gamma neural uptake at 93%, ready for final stage. Handwritten note, if Jazz won't take over willingly, we'll transplant her into a compliant vessel. Greg's face went pale. "They're not copying kids. They're replacing them." Gamma nodded. "Starting with me." The alarms blared to life as they hit the stairwell. Gamma moved stiffly, her limbs weakened from years in containment. Rook cursed at his tablet. "They've sealed the exits." Jazz spotted the red exit sign. "Fire escape. Go." Gamma grabbed her arm. "You don't understand. There is no fire escape." The first security team rounded the corner. Gamma shoved something into Jazz's hands, a USB drive shaped like the rabbit pendant her mother used to wear. "Take it and run," she said. Jazz hesitated. "I'm not leaving you." Gamma smiled, a real one this time. "Yes, you are. Because I'm not the only one." The USB label read, Phase 4, 24 subjects active. The car screeched away as the lab erupted in flames behind them. Greg white-knuckled the wheel while Rook hyperventilated in the back seat. Jazz clutched the USB. "How many more are there?" Greg didn't answer. Just turned on the radio. Asterisk, breaking news. Carrington Biotech CEO Darius Carrington has been hospitalized after a reported stroke. Sources say his daughter Jasmine remains at large. Asterisk. Rook looked up. That's not a stroke. Jazz knew. They all did. Her father was making his move. The hospital monitors beeped in perfect rhythm, like a countdown. Jazz stood outside her father's room watching through the glass as doctors adjusted 4 lines. Darius looked smaller in the bed, his skin waxy under the fluorescent lights. The man who'd built an empire now had tubes snaking from both arms. Then his eyes opened. Not the foggy confusion of a stroke patient. Sharp. Aware. He smiled at her through the window. The truth about the stroke. The medical chart was fiction. Jazz flipped through the pages. All the right terminology, all the wrong details. No mention of the elevated liver enzymes. No note about the surgical scar. Phase 4 doesn't mean terminal, Darius said when she entered. His voice was weaker than she'd ever heard it. It means transitional. Jazz dropped the USB on his chest. How many children did you replace? Darius sighed. You always ask the wrong questions. He pressed the call button. Nurse, we're ready. The procedure. The nurse wasn't medical staff. Jazz recognized her from the lab, one of the researchers. She wheeled in a machine that looked like an EEG with too many wires. Consciousness transfer requires 3 things, Darius explained as the woman prepped his scalp with electrodes. A donor mind, a host body, and a genetic match within 0.3% variance. Jazz's mouth went dry. Gamma was practice. He winced as the needles went in. You're the masterpiece. The machine hummed to life. The escape that wasn't. Jazz lunged for the door. It was locked. Darius chuckled. This hospital? I own it. On the monitor, brainwave patterns spiked. You're not leaving, Jasmine. You're ascending. The USB still sat on his chest. Jazz grabbed it and froze. The label had changed. Now it read, Subject Prime, ready for transfer. The betrayal. Greg's voice crackled through her earpiece. Jazz, we lost Rook. They took him at the... The line cut out as the hospital lights flickered. The researcher gasped. On Darius's monitor, the brainwaves flatlined, then rebooted. The transfer. Darius's body went rigid. The machines screamed. The researcher frantically adjusted dials. Jazz backed against the wall as her father's head lolled toward her. His mouth moved, but the voice wasn't his. It was younger. Jasmine, the voice said. It's me. It's Rook. The revelation. The researcher stepped back. It worked. Darius, no, Rook, looked down at his aged hands in wonder. Holy shit. It actually worked. Jazz's knees gave out. Her father wasn't trying to transfer his consciousness. He was building an army of minds in disposable bodies. And Rook was just the first soldier. The choice. The fire alarm blared. Sprinklers activated. In the chaos, the researcher dropped a keycard. Rook and Darius's body reached for her. We can stop this. Jazz looked at the keycard, at the USB, at the man who was and wasn't her father. Then she ran. The aftermath. The parking garage CCTV would later show. 3 hours 17 minutes and 22 seconds. Jasmine Carrington enters alone. 3 hours 17 minutes and 48 seconds. Gunshots heard. 3 hours 18 minutes and 12 seconds. Black SUV speeds away. But in that minute and a half, only 2 people knew the truth. And one of them wasn't human anymore. The safe house smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. Jazz pressed the stolen keycard against the table, watching the others react. Around the dim kitchen, 5 faces stared back, all strangers, all familiar. The girl with box braids was the first to speak. "So he got to Rook." Jazz nodded. The USB's decrypted files glowed on the laptop between them, showing 23 other names beside hers. The muscular guy by the fridge rolled up his sleeve, revealing a barcode tattoo. "Welcome to the club, sis. We're the leftovers." They called themselves Originals. The first versions, the blueprints. Each had a clone walking around in the world, perfect copies with upgraded obedience. Maya, box braids, was supposed to be a prodigy chemist. Her duplicate now worked at Pfizer. Diego, the tattooed guy, was engineered for combat. His replica was Blackwater's top operative. The twins, Eli and Ezra, had photographic memories. Their counterparts were embedded in the NSA. And Jazz? Her file simply read, *prime. Neural architecture ideal for transfer. Reserved for Phase V**. The plan. Eli spread blueprints across the table. Mnemosyne's mainframe is here. He tapped a Colorado mountain range. Underground. EMP shielded. Ezra handed Jazz a photo. "Your dad's there prepping the final transfer." Ezra handed Jazz a photo. "Your dad's there prepping the final transfer." The image showed Darius, or whatever was wearing him, walking into a bunker. But it was the figure beside him that made Jazz's pulse spike. Gamma. Alive. Wearing a lab coat. Wait. Jazz's fingers trembled. If she's there, whose body is my father using? The room went quiet. Maya chewed her lip. "We think Rook was just the test run. The endgame is someone bigger," Diego finished. "Someone with real power." The files contained one last surprise. Jazz found it while cross-referencing political schedules with Mnemosyne's shipping logs. The vice president's daughter had been sick last month. She'd returned to school with a new mole on her left hand, the exact spot where Jazz had a birthmark. The decision. They argued for hours. Maya wanted to burn it all down. The twins insisted on leaking to the press. Diego just wanted to run. Jazz stared at Gamma's photo, at the way her clone stood just a little too straight, smiled a little too wide. Like she was waiting. Like she was expecting her. "We don't destroy it," Jazz finally said. "We use it." The trap. The Colorado facility was colder than expected. Jazz's breath fogged as she stepped off the freight elevator, the stolen keycard in her pocket. Gamma waited at the end of the hall, pristine in her lab coat. "You came." Jazz matched her posture, her cadence. "You knew I would." For the first time, Gamma's smile reached her eyes. "Then you understand. This isn't about replacing us." She gestured to the vault door behind her. "It's about surpassing us." The door hissed open, revealing rows of glass tanks. Each held a body. Each was empty. The machine in the center hummed with familiar energy. Jazz recognized the EEG arrays, the spinal connectors. But this model was larger, more advanced. Gamma pressed a hand to the glass. "They're not cloning children, Jasmine. They're growing vessels. Blank slates. No memories. No resistance." She turned, eyes gleaming. "Imagine it. Your mind. My obedience. In a body that will never age, never break." Jazz stepped closer to the tanks. "And the originals?" Gamma's smile turned pitying. "What use is a rough draft when the final copy is perfect?" The escape. Jazz's hand closed around the USB in her pocket. The real one. The one Rook had slipped her during the transfer, when his consciousness still fought for control. She met Gamma's gaze. "You're right. Why keep the original?" Then she smashed the emergency glass and plunged the facility into darkness. The aftermath. Alarms wailed. Gamma screamed. Somewhere in the blackness, tanks began shattering. Jazz ran toward the exit, but strong hands yanked her sideways into a supply closet. A familiar voice whispered, "Don't move." Rook, real Rook, his consciousness somehow clinging to a fraction of Darius's mind, pressed a detonator into her palm. The vents, he gasped. Gas line runs right under. His body seized. Darius's face flickered back into control. The last thing Jazz saw before the door burst open was the old man's smirk. "Hello, daughter." The detonator was cold in Jazz's hand. Darius's breath smelled like antiseptic and something rotting underneath, the scent of a body rejecting its stolen mind. Tick-tock, Jasmine. His fingers dug into her wrist. The gas won't stay inert forever. Somewhere in the facility, glass continued to shatter. A child's voice, maybe Eli, screamed. Jazz closed her eyes and pressed the button. The explosion. The blast wasn't fire. It was cold, a rolling wave of liquid nitrogen vaporizing as it hit oxygen. Jazz saw it coming through the closet vents, a glittering white tsunami freezing everything in its path. Darius's grip slackened as frost crawled up his arm. "You stupid girl." His pupils dilated. For one fleeting second, Rook looked out through his eyes. Then the door iced over. The aftermath. Silence. Then, cracking. The sound of 1,000 ice sculptures shattering at once. Jazz kicked the door open to a frozen hellscape. The gas had preserved more than destroyed. Gamma stood mid-sprint, face locked in a snarl, fingers curled like claws. The tanks were intact. The bodies inside, less so. A whimper came from the control room. The defector. Ezra crouched behind a console, his nose bleeding. They took Eli. Jazz hauled him up. Who? The suits. The ones Gamma reported to. He pointed to the security feed. The screen showed 3 men in black loading an unconscious Eli into a van. The license plate was blurred, but Jazz recognized the parking permit dangling from the mirror. U.S. Senate. The revelation. The surviving computer spat out one file before dying. Operation Phoenix. Objective: transfer of essential personnel to engineered vessels. Phase 1. Test subjects, complete. Phase 2. Political assets, in progress. Phase 3. Executive transfer, pending. Attached was a list. 27 names. The vice president's was third. The president's was last. The escape. The emergency tunnel stank of mildew and desperation. Ezra limped beside Jazz, his breath ragged. "They're not just selling kids," he panted. "They're selling immortality." Jazz checked the pistol she'd taken from a frozen guard. "We need to get to D.C." A noise ahead made them freeze. Something was moving in the dark. The survivor. Gamma stepped into the dim emergency lights. Half her face was frostbitten, one eye milky white. She raised shaking hands. "I can help." Jazz aimed at her forehead. "Why?" "Because I remember." Gamma touched her chest. "The bike accident." Mom's laugh. "The way he changed after she died." A tear froze on her cheek. "I'm not her. But I'm not them either." The decision. The tunnel exit opened onto a snowy mountainside. Dawn painted the peaks pink. Ezra collapsed in the snow. "They have Eli. They have the tech. What the hell can we do?" Gamma hugged herself against the cold. "We have the one thing they don't." Jazz watched their breath fog in the morning air. "Originality," she whispered. Then the shot rang out. The cliffhanger. Ezra fell first, red blooming across his chest. Gamma screamed. Jazz turned, just as the second bullet hit her stomach. Standing at the tunnel entrance, smoke curling from his rifle, was Darius. "Oh, Rook," wearing her father's smile like a ill-fitting mask. "Miss me," he said. The snow burned more than the bullet. Jazz collapsed face first into the powder, the heat in her stomach turning to ice almost instantly. Gamma's scream sounded distant, warped, like hearing someone shout through thick glass. Rook Darius lowered the rifle, his movements jerky, unpracticed. Should've taken the transfer when you had the chance. His voice kept slipping between Rook's cadence and her father's. Jazz's fingers found the wound. Warm. Slick. She rolled onto her back just as Gamma lunged at their attacker, a jagged piece of rebar glinting in her hand. The fight was brutal. Gamma moved with clinical precision, but Rugdarius fought like a cornered animal, all teeth and desperation. They tumbled down the slope, disappearing into the tree line. Ezra groaned beside her. Go. Stop them. Jazz pressed her scarf to his chest. Not leaving you. His bloody hand gripped hers. Eli needs you. His eyes flickered to something over her shoulder. Take it. The rifle lay half buried in snow where Rugdarius had dropped it. The hunt. Blood marked Gamma's trail like breadcrumbs. Jazz followed it, the rifle heavy in her numb hands. Every step sent fire through her abdomen, but the cold was a blessing. It slowed the bleeding. She found them by the frozen creek. Gamma was kneeling on Rugdarius's chest, the rebar poised above his eye. Her frostbitten face twisted in rage. You took everything from us. Jazz cocked the rifle. Gamma. She didn't turn. He deserves to die. Maybe. Jazz exhaled slowly. But we need what's in his head. Rugdarius laughed, a wet, broken sound. Too late. They're already moving. Phase 3. Gamma drove the rebar down. The truth in the blood. The USB in Rugdarius's pocket was encrypted, but the sticky note stuck to it wasn't. White House Christmas Gala, December 24th, package delivery. Jazz stared at the date. 3 days from now. Gamma wiped her hands on her ruined lab coat. They're accelerating the timeline. Jazz thought of the president's name on that list, of Eli being taken, of Phase 3's executive transfer. She looked at Gamma's frostbitten face, at the blood on her hands, at the way she cradled her injured arm exactly like Jazz would. We need to get to D.C., Jazz said. The safe house. The train ride was a blur of pain and adrenaline. Jazz faded in and out, waking to Gamma pressing stolen gauze to her stomach, to the rhythmic clatter of the tracks, to the whispered arguments of other passengers about the terrorist attack at a Colorado research facility. The D.C. safe house was a basement apartment near Union Station, stocked with cash, weapons, and, oddly, a dozen boxes of Pop-Tarts. Maya was waiting. She took one look at Jazz's wound and got to work. Ezra. Gamma shook her head. Maya's hands stilled for only a second before continuing to stitch. Then we're the last. Jazz gritted her teeth against the needle. Not for long. The plan. Gamma spread the contents of Rugdarius's pockets across the table. A keycard for the White House physician's office. A receipt for a tuxedo rental. A photo of the vice president's daughter, circled in red. Maya whistled. They're not just replacing politicians. They're replacing their families first. Jazz picked up the keycard. We need to get into that gala. Gamma smiled, a real one, despite her ruined face. I know a guy. The ghost. The guy turned out to be a former Mnemosyne security officer named Cole, now hiding in a Virginia storage unit. He took one look at Gamma and crossed himself. They told me you were destroyed in the breach. Gamma touched her frostbite. Close enough. Cole's intel was priceless. 1. The gala was cover for the president's routine physical. 2. The White House physician had been replaced last month. 3. The real physician was being held at a private clinic in Maryland. Jazz exchanged glances with Maya. We need to crash a party. Cole handed her an envelope. Inside, an invitation to the White House Christmas Gala, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Carrington. The trap. The storage unit door rattled. Cole went pale. They found me. Gamma grabbed a crowbar. Maya cocked her pistol. Jazz limped to the door's peephole and froze. Standing outside, his face bruised but very much alive, was Ezra, with Eli beside him. both wearing identical, two perfect smiles. Jazz. Ezra called. We escaped. Let us in. Gamma's breath hitched. Don't. Jazz watched Eli tilt his head, the same way Gamma had when calculating something. She backed away from the door. They're already copied. The escape. The storage unit's back exit led to a maze of alleys. Jazz ran despite the pain, despite Gamma's limp, despite Maya's whispered curses. Behind them, the sound of the door being kicked in. Then Eli's voice, sweet as poisoned honey. Jasmine, Daddy misses you. The White House Christmas tree glittered through the iron gates, its lights reflecting in puddles of melted snow. Jazz adjusted the wire hidden beneath her borrowed cocktail dress, the earpiece itching. Remember, Gamma whispered through the comms. The physician's office is in the East Wing. You've got 12 minutes between guard rotations. Jazz smoothed the invitation, the one Cole had died to deliver, and approached the checkpoint. The Secret Service agent scanned her face, then frowned at his tablet. Mrs. Carrington, your husband isn't with you. Jazz forced a smile. Business kept him in Colorado. The agent's eyes lingered on her stomach where the bullet wound still ached beneath layers of makeup and Spanx. Then the gate buzzed open. The gala. Candlelight. Champagne. The Marine Band playing carols with military precision. Jazz moved through the crowd like a ghost, catching snippets of conversation. Approval ratings slipping. The president looks tired, don't you think? Such a shame about his daughter's sudden illness. She spotted the vice president first. His smile was too wide, his handshake just slightly out of sync. When he lifted his glass, Jazz saw the telltale mark on his wrist, a tiny barcode peeking from his cuff. Replaced. Then the band stopped playing. The president entered, and Jazz's blood turned to ice. The revelation. He moved differently, stiffer, the way Gamma had before she'd broken programming. But it wasn't his gait that confirmed it. It was his eyes when they locked onto Jazz across the room. Her father's eyes. Darius Carrington's consciousness now inhabited the leader of the free world. The president raised his glass in a toast. Directly at her. To family, he said. The distraction. Gamma's voice crackled in her ear. Now, Maya. Somewhere in the West Wing, an alarm blared. The lights flickered. The band missed a note. Jazz slipped away in the chaos. The physician's office. The keycard worked on the third try. Inside, the office looked normal. Stethoscopes, diplomas, a framed photo of the physician with the first family. Then Jazz noticed the second door. The one with the retinal scanner. Gamma's voice turned urgent. They're coming back early. 2 minutes max. Jazz grabbed the fire extinguisher and swung. The nightmare. The hidden room contained 1. An advanced version of the transfer machine. 2. A wall screen showing vital signs for patient POTUS. 3. A glass tank holding the real president's body, empty. But it was the smaller tank that made Jazz vomit into a biohazard bin. The first daughter floated in amber liquid, her skull opened like a flower, her spine connected to wires. Alive. Aware. Her eyes tracked Jazz. A monitor above read. Neural host, 87% upload complete. The choice. The door hissed open behind her. Jasmine. The president. No, Darius. Stood in the doorway. The Secret Service flanked him, their guns drawn. He smiled. You always were too clever for your own good. Jazz's hand hovered over the machine's emergency purge button. One press would kill the girl in the tank. Would it kill her father too? The first daughter blinked. Slowly, deliberately. Then her finger twitched toward a control panel just beyond the glass. Jazz lunged. The explosion blew out every window in the East Wing. Jazz ran through smoke and screaming guests, the first daughter's neural scan drive burning a hole in her clutch. Gamma's voice was frantic. Maya's down. Meet at extraction point, Charlie. A hand grabbed Jazz's arm. The vice president leaned close, his breath reeking of peppermint and something metallic. "He'll never stop coming for you. Jazz need him in the groin." The VP collapsed, but not before she saw it. The barcode on his wrist was smudging. Asterisk, not a replacement. A willing participant. Asterisk. The truth. The stolen drive contained more than scans. It held records. Project Phoenix wasn't just about immortality. It was about selection. Only 3% of the population had neural architecture suitable for transfer. The rest? Gamma read the file aloud as they sped away. Asterisk, unsuitable subjects to be repurposed as organic storage vessels or terminated. Asterisk. Maya, bleeding in the back seat, whispered, "They're not replacing people." Jazz watched the White House burn in the rearview mirror. "They're curating humanity." The abandoned subway tunnel reeked of rust and stale urine. Jazz pressed the neural drive against the flickering bulb, watching shadows dance across the concrete walls. The Resistance hideout was little more than a repurposed maintenance room, its steel shelves stocked with stolen medical supplies and weapons that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. "They call us the unfit." The woman speaking had no eyebrows, only scar tissue where they'd been burned off. She tapped her temple. Neural architecture scored below 2.7 on their scale. Can't be transferred, can't be copied. Just disposable. Gamma ran a finger along one of the strange weapons, a pistol with a glowing blue canister attached. "And these neurotoxin rounds." The woman, Lena, smiled grimly. "The only thing that kills both body and copied consciousness." Jazz's stomach twisted. She thought of the VP's smudged barcode. How many of them are willing participants? Lena exchanged glances with the others. "More every day. You'd be surprised what people will do for immortality." The first daughter's gift. The neural drive contained more than data. It held her. The first daughter's consciousness floated in the digital space, fragmented but aware. Jazz plugged the drive into a jury-rigged monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing a girl's face rendered in pixelated greens. Asterisk. "You came back." Asterisk. The voice came through tinny speakers. Gamma recoiled. "That's not possible." Asterisk. "They kept me conscious during the transfer." Asterisk. The image glitched. Asterisk. "I felt everything." Asterisk. Jazz leaned closer. "What is Phase 4? The screen dissolved into static, then reformed as a map of the United States. Red dots clustered around major cities. Asterisk. Harvest centers. Asterisk. The girl's voice turned urgent. Asterisk. They're not just selecting individuals anymore. They're selecting entire cities. Asterisk. The list. Maya limped over, her bandages seeping through. What does that even mean? The monitor zoomed in on a facility schematic, a massive structure beneath Denver International Airport. The label read, Neural Archive, Primary. Asterisk. They've perfected mass scanning. Asterisk. The first daughter's image flickered. Asterisk. No more tanks, no more clones. Just uploads, waiting for worthy hosts. Asterisk. Lena cursed. The blackouts. Jazz looked up. What blackouts? Last month, 6 major cities went dark for exactly 47 minutes each. Cell towers, power grids, everything. Lena's hands shook. They weren't outages. They were scans. The monitor displayed a list. 1. Boston, complete. 2. Atlanta, complete. 3. Chicago, in progress. 4. New York, pending. The betrayal. Gamma had been quiet too long. Jazz turned to find her staring at the weapon wall with unsettling focus. You knew. Jazz grabbed her arm. About the scans. Gamma didn't deny it. I knew they were working on population-level transfers. Not that they'd succeeded. Maya's gun was out in an instant. You lying bitch. The explosion cut her off. The tunnel shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Over the screams, a familiar voice boomed through megaphones. Asterisk, Jasmine Carrington. Come out, and we'll spare the unfit. Asterisk, Darius. Using the president's voice. Gamma met Jazz's eyes. I didn't lead them here, but I know how they found us. She pulled down her collar, revealing a subcutaneous implant Jazz had never noticed. Asterisk, we all have trackers. Asterisk, the escape. Lena shoved a neurotoxin pistol into Jazz's hands. West Tunnel leads to the old postal tracks. Go. Jazz hesitated. What about you? The woman smiled, hefting a strange rifle. We've been waiting for this fight. Gamma grabbed Jazz's wrist. The drive, we have to take her with us. The monitor glitched wildly. Asterisk, no time. They'll wipe me if... Asterisk. The screen went black. The revelation. They ran through miles of crumbling tunnels, the sounds of gunfire and screams fading behind them. At the third junction, Gamma suddenly stopped. It's not just cities. She gasped for breath. Phase 4 is generational. They're modifying newborns' neural architecture in maternity wards. The selection starts at birth now. Jazz remembered the list. The dates. The way Chicago's scan coincided with a free pediatric health initiative at every major hospital. Maya leaned against the wall, her bandages now completely red. So what's the play? Jazz checked the neurotoxin rounds. 11 left. We find patient 0. The drive contained one last file, a video log from the first successful transfer. The date stamp was 3 years ago. The footage showed a hospital room. A young woman strapped to a bed. A team of doctors hovering as she screamed. And in the corner, watching calmly, was a face Jazz recognized. The current First Lady. Gamma inhaled sharply. She was their first test. The woman on screen thrashed as the machine powered up. Then, calm. Her eyes opened, and she smiled Darius's smile. The decision. The tunnel exit dumped them onto a deserted subway platform. Dawn filtered through grimy skylights. Maya collapsed onto a bench. We can't beat this. They're everywhere. Jazz ejected the drive's chip and crushed it underfoot. Then we don't beat them. Gamma understood first. We join them. Jazz looked at her, really looked. At the frostbite scars. At the way she held her injured arm. At the tracker beneath her skin. And made her choice. The White House operator answered on the first ring. Jazz took a deep breath. Tell the president his daughter's coming home. The White House gates parted like theater curtains, revealing the scorched east wing where Jazz had blown a hole in history 3 days prior. Marine guards flanked her, their fingers never far from triggers, their eyes tracking her every twitch. Gamma walked half a step behind, her frostbitten face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Maya had stayed behind, too wounded, too angry. Remember, Gamma whispered as they climbed the steps. He'll test you first. Jazz adjusted the neurotoxin cartridge sewn into her sleeve. Let him. The Oval Office doors opened before she could knock. The reunion. Darius, wearing the president's face like an expensive suit, stood with his back to them, staring out at the rose garden. The room smelled of lemon polish and something faintly antiseptic. You look terrible, Jasmine. His voice was all wrong, the president's Midwestern cadence layered over her father's diction. Colorado didn't agree with you. Jazz counted the security cameras. 6 visible. Probably more hidden. You shot me. He turned. The president's smile didn't reach Darius's cold eyes. I was aiming for your spine. Wanted to keep that brilliant brain intact. Gamma stiffened beside her. A tablet slid across the Resolute desk. Jazz recognized the logo. Mnemosyne's latest neural mapping software. Since you're so fond of stealing data, Darius said, why don't you analyze some? The screen showed brain scans. Dozens. All children. Jazz zoomed in on one. These are the maternity ward modifications. Improvements. He corrected. We're giving them the gift of compatibility. No more messy transfers later in life. Gamma's breath hitched when Jazz swiped to the last scan. A newborn. Labeled, Carrington, J. Generation 2 prototype. Jazz's hands betrayed no tremor. You scanned me as a baby. Of course. Darius leaned back in the presidential chair. You were always meant for this. The tour. The West Wing basement looked nothing like the physician's office Jazz had destroyed. This was cleaner, more clinical, and filled with children. They sat at pristine workstations, tiny headsets monitoring their brainwaves as they solved complex equations. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8. Our future leaders, Darius said proudly. Perfect minds in perfect bodies. One girl looked up. Her eyes were decades older than her face. Gamma made a small, broken noise. That's the first daughter. But Jazz was staring at the boy beside her. Eli. The lie. Jazz played her part perfectly. The reluctant heir. The prodigal daughter. The odd convert. She asked the right questions. Gasped at the right revelations. Even shed a tear when shown the honor of being Generation 1. Darius ate it up. By dinner, served in the private residence by silent Marines, he was relaxed enough to sip wine. You understand now, don't you? He swirled the Cabernet. This was never about power. It's about legacy. Jazz cut into her steak. The knife felt heavier than it should. And Mom. His fork hesitated. What about her? Was she part of the legacy too? The silence stretched. Then the First Lady entered, and Jazz saw the truth. The First Lady's hands. The woman moved wrong. Stiff. Like Gamma had before the frostbite changed her. But it wasn't her gait that gave it away. It was how she served the president's coffee. 2 sugars. No cream. Exactly how Jazz's mother had taken it. The revelation. The bathroom mirror didn't steam up. Jazz pressed her palms against the cold glass, counting breaths. Gamma's voice came through the vent. Asterisk, he transferred her. Into the First Lady. Years ago. Asterisk. Jazz thought of the video. The screaming woman. The date stamp from 3 years before the First Lady took office. She turned on the faucet to mask her words. We end this tonight. The trap. The Lincoln bedroom door creaked open at 2:17 a.m. Jazz pretended to sleep as footsteps approached. A needle pricked her neck. She let her body go limp. Through slitted eyes, she saw them, Darius and the First Lady, flanked by Marines. Take her to the archive, Darius ordered. We'll begin the transfer at dawn. As they lifted her, Jazz's fingers found the neurotoxin cartridge in her sleeve. And waited. The awakening. The archive was colder than expected. Jazz came to on a steel table, her wrists and ankles clamped down. Above her, a massive machine hummed to life. Darius adjusted the settings. Don't worry, Jasmine. You won't feel a thing. The First Lady stroked Jazz's hair. Her touch was ice. You'll be so much happier this way. Jazz focused past them, to where Gamma stood in the shadows. Their eyes met. A silent countdown. 3, 2, 1. The betrayal. Gamma moved fast. The neurotoxin round took the First Lady between the eyes. She dropped without a sound. Darius barely flinched. I always wondered when you'd turn. Gamma racked another round. You shouldn't have used my mother's face. Jazz's breath caught. My mother. The realization hit as the restraints released. Gamma wasn't just a copy. She was the original first daughter's consciousness, transferred into Jazz's cloned body during the Colorado explosion. And she'd been playing the long game. The truth. The neurotoxin wouldn't work on Darius. Not in the president's body. But the syringe Gamma produced from her pocket, filled with shimmering silver liquid, made him go pale. Where did you get that? Gamma plunged it into his neck. From your real archive. The president's body convulsed. Foam spilled from his lips. And as the seizure reached its peak, a voice came through the speakers. The real president's voice, trapped in some digital hell. Asterisk. Help me. Asterisk. Escape. Alarms wailed as they ran through the tunnels beneath the White House. Gamma led the way, her movements sure. You knew, Jazz gasped. The whole time. Gamma didn't slow. I knew he'd transferred your mother into the First Lady. I didn't know she'd. Her voice broke. I didn't know she'd enjoy it. The exit loomed ahead. Freedom. Then the lights cut out. And a new voice echoed through the dark. Asterisk. Hello, daughters. Asterisk. The cliffhanger. Jazz knew that voice. She'd heard it every night in her dreams for 20 years. Her mother stepped into the dim emergency lighting, very much alive, and holding a neurotoxin pistol to Gamma's forehead. Did you miss me? The muzzle pressed harder into Gamma's forehead. Jazz watched a single bead of sweat trace the scar tissue on Gamma's ruined cheek, the first real sign of fear she'd ever shown. Mom. Jazz kept her hands visible, her stolen neurotoxin pistol still holstered. You're alive. The woman who wore her mother's face tilted her head. The motion was too precise, too calculated. The White House bunker's emergency lights cast harsh shadows across features Jazz had spent a lifetime trying to remember. Alive is a relative term. Her mother's voice came out wrong, layered with something mechanical. But then, so is Mother. Behind them, the ventilation system kicked on, carrying the scent of ozone and something sweetly rotten. The walk. They moved single file through the bunker's underlevels. 1. The Mother, gun steady. 2. Gamma, hands raised. 3. Jazz, counting steps, exits, weapons. The walls changed from concrete to something older, pre-Civil War stonework covered in modern cabling. Jazz's shoulder brushed against a pipe, its surface thrumming with hot water. Somewhere ahead, machinery growled. You transferred first. Jazz kept her tone neutral. Before Dad. Her mother didn't turn. Before Darius existed. The mnemosyne process was mine before he militarized it. Gamma stiffened. Jazz saw the realization hit them both at once. Darius hadn't created the technology. He'd stolen it. The chamber looked like a cathedral built for machines. Row upon row of server stacks stretched into the darkness, their cooling fans whispering like distant ghosts. In the center stood a single glass tank, empty, its interior scarred with claw marks. Jazz's stomach turned. This is where you kept him. The real president. Her mother holstered her weapon with unsettling smoothness. Kept. No harvested. She pressed a palm to the tank. 63 complete neural maps from this vessel alone. Each one a masterpiece of political instinct and social calculus. Gamma edged toward a control panel. You're not just transferring consciousness. You're collecting them. Of course. Her mother smiled. Why settle for one first daughter when I can have all possible iterations? A monitor flickered to life, displaying dozens of faces. All Jazz. All different. The first betrayal. The files scrolled too fast to comprehend, but Jazz caught the essentials. 1. Project Matriarch, a bid to create the perfect ruling lineage. 2. Generational refinement. Each Jasmine model improved upon the last. 3. Termination protocols. Previous versions systematically purged. Gamma grabbed Jazz's wrist. We're not her daughters. We're her drafts. Jazz stared at the earliest photo, a girl who looked like her, but softer, more innocent. Labeled V1.0, terminated, excessive empathy. Her mother traced the screen. Darius always lacked vision. He wanted to sell our work to the highest bidder. Her nails, too perfect, too sharp, tapped the glass. I wanted to build a dynasty. The offer. The chair was cold against Jazz's back. The neural headset weighed less than it should have. Join me. Her mother adjusted the settings. Not as a copy, not as an heir, as a partner. Across the room, Gamma strained against her restraints. The look in her eyes wasn't fear anymore, it was warning. Jazz studied the headset's leads. And if I say no? Her mother's sigh held centuries of disappointment. Then you'll join the archive anyway. In pieces. The machine hummed to life. The escape. Gamma's scream wasn't pain, it was distraction. Jazz moved on instinct. 1. The neurotoxin pistol into her mother's ribs. 2. The thumb drive into the main console. 3. The emergency override code Gamma had whispered in the tunnel. The system bucked. Alarms shrieked. Her mother staggered back, not from the gun, but from the screen's flashing red. Corruption detected. Purge initiated. Jazz yanked Gamma free as the first server stack exploded. The truth. The tunnels shook around them. Jazz dragged Gamma through smoke and sparking wires, the screams of dying AI echoing behind them. You knew, Jazz gasped. About the archive. Gamma's laugh was bloody. I knew she was worse than Darius. Not how much. A support beam collapsed behind them. The blast wave sent them tumbling into an antechamber, where a single terminal still glowed. Jazz recognized the file immediately. Carrington, E. Neural map 100%. Her finger hovered over the delete command. Gamma grabbed her wrist. Wait. The choice. The video played in grainy black and white. A younger Darius sobbing over a hospital bed. A woman who looked like the mother Jazz remembered screaming at him. Asterisk. You promised. One mind, one transfer. Not this farming. Asterisk. The date stamp was 3 days before the car accident. Gamma's voice was soft. He tried to stop her. Jazz stared at the face she'd spent a lifetime mourning. The woman who'd orchestrated her own death to escape scrutiny. Who'd probably caused the crash that nearly killed Jazz at 6. Who'd been refining her daughter like software. Her finger found the delete key. The aftermath. Dawn painted the Potomac gold as they emerged through a maintenance hatch. The White House burned behind them, its flames licking at a sky full of news helicopters. Gamma collapsed against a tree. What now? Jazz watched the smoke curl into the morning air. Somewhere in that inferno, the last traces of her parents were turning to ash. She thought of the other facilities. The harvest centers. The children in the West Wing basement. We find them all. She helped Gamma stand. Every archive. Every copy. Gamma studied her face. And then, Jazz touched the neurotoxin pistol. We build something better. The church basement smelled of mildew and burnt coffee, with an underlying tang of antiseptic from the makeshift med station in the corner. Jazz leaned against the peeling plaster wall, counting heads as the newcomers shuffled in. 12 this week, each with the same hollow-eyed stare she'd seen in the mirror months ago. The youngest was a girl no older than 6, clutching a teddy bear with surgical stitches across its belly that mirrored the fresh scar peeking from beneath her sweater sleeve. When the child turned to accept a mug from Gamma, Jazz saw the telltale barcode on her left wrist, the ink already fading to a ghostly gray. Welcome to the unfit resistance. Jazz tossed another log into the cast-iron wood stove, sending up a shower of sparks. The flames cast flickering shadows across the stained glass windows, turning the apostles' faces into twisted masks. First rule, no real names. Second rule, if your neural scan score was under 3.0, you're family now. Gamma moved through the room with practiced ease, passing out mugs of something pretending to be hot chocolate. Her frostbite scars had faded to silver webs across her dark skin, but the limp from the White House escape would never fully heal. Neither would the way her fingers twitched toward hidden weapons at sudden noises, or how she checked every window twice before sitting down. The little girl with the teddy raised her hand, her voice barely above a whisper. My mommy said the bad people are gone. Jazz crossed the creaking floorboards and knelt until they were eye level. Up close, she could see the faint injection marks along the child's hairline where they'd attempted neural mapping. The organized bad people are gone, kiddo. The greedy ones. She glanced at Gamma, who gave a barely perceptible nod toward two newcomers whispering in the corner. A man with military posture and a woman whose pupils dilated too slowly. They're just getting started. The new network. Safe houses dotted the country like a malignant constellation, each with its own grim specialty. 1. Portland. A defaced mnemosony lab with its walls still bearing the ghostly outlines of dismantled equipment, now housing 27 discarded child prototypes. The oldest, a boy who called himself Ren, had taught himself to rewire the security cameras into an early warning system. 2. Austin. An abandoned Walmart turned into a school where the ceiling tiles rained dead roaches when the trains passed. Here, a former neuroscientist named Dr. Ruiz helped kids who remembered lives they'd never lived sort real memories from implanted ones. 3. Detroit. Maya's underground clinic, accessible only through a manhole behind a burnt-out Kmart. The walls were papered with faded pharmaceutical ads, and the surgical lights ran on stolen generator power. This was where you went when you needed a tracker removed or a face changed. Jazz monitored them all from the old Denver facility, the only archive she hadn't destroyed. Its servers now ran decryption algorithms that scoured the dark web for mnemosony affiliates, while the former cryo chambers stored emergency medical supplies. The place still stank of disinfectant and something sweetly rotten beneath it, no matter how much bleach they used. Gamma called it their monster under the bed, and like any childhood nightmare, it growled in the dark. The last clone. The alert came at 3:17 a.m. Jazz knew the time without checking. It always came at 3:17, that witching hour when the barriers between worlds felt thinnest. She rolled out of the cot she shared with Gamma, careful not to disturb the other woman's fitful sleep. The concrete floors were icy against her bare feet as she padded to the central console. The screen glowed ominously in the dark. Vault 7 unlocked. File accessed. Carrington. J. Final iteration. The video showed a sterile white room she didn't recognize. A version of herself she'd never met sat at a steel table, her hair pulled into a painfully tight bun, her lab coat crisp under the fluorescent lights. This Jasmine had crow's feet at the corners of her eyes and a scar across her collarbone in the shape of a question mark. Asterisk, if you're seeing this, the archive purge failed. Asterisk, her double side, the sound crackling through the ancient speakers. Asterisk, I'm the last successful transfer before Mother changed. I've been hiding in the Denver backup drives for 12 years, watching through the cameras. Asterisk, a humorless smile. Asterisk, you've done well, little original. Asterisk. Jazz's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Gamma slept just down the hall, her breathing uneven from the shrapnel still lodged near her lung. One command would erase this final ghost. The screen flickered. Asterisk, don't delete me yet. I know where she hid the others. Asterisk. A map unfolded across the display, zooming in on a speck in the Atlantic. The island. Satellite images revealed a private atoll near Bermuda, its jungle canopy hiding a compound arranged in a perfect Fibonacci spiral. Thermal scans showed 32 human heat signatures moving through the buildings, plus an underground complex radiating unnatural warmth. The file contained one more artifact, a child's drawing scanned in shaky resolution. It showed a woman with two sharp nails holding hands with a little girl outside a house. Not just any house, the White House, rendered in clumsy crayon strokes. Scrawled at the bottom in a child's handwriting. Asterisk, Generation 3 is almost ready. Grandma says I'll be perfect. Asterisk. Jazz's coffee cup shattered on the floor. The decision. Gamma studied the image over Jazz's shoulder, her breath warm and alive against Jazz's neck. Could be a trap. Jazz zoomed in on the mansion's private dock. A 200-foot luxury yacht rocked in the turquoise waves, its name clearly visible in high resolution. Matriarch. She saved the file to a secure drive. Or a family reunion. Gamma's hand found hers, their scars aligning. We'll need a bigger boat. The armory. Dawn found them in the facility's old loading bay, packing gear into a stolen Coast Guard cutter's waterproof compartments. Neurotoxin rounds, the last of Maya's stock, each bullet hand-loaded with that eerie blue liquid. EMP grenades, homemade, prone to premature detonation. Tracker-disabling serum, smelling faintly of rotten bananas. A single syringe labeled V7.0 antidote that Gamma refused to explain. Gamma tested the boat's throttle, the engine's growl echoing off the concrete walls. We could just call the Navy. Let them bomb the island into the next century. Jazz watched the sunrise paint the Rockies gold through the bulletproof glass. Somewhere under that Caribbean island, more children were being refined like software. More minds were being harvested. More versions of herself were being groomed to rule a broken world. She tossed the final duffel aboard, the one with the C4 and the childhood photo of her mother she couldn't bring herself to burn. Some monsters, she said, checking the neurotoxin pistol's charge. You have to kill up close. The last message. As the boat pulled away from the dock, Jazz's burner phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single sentence. Asterisk. Bring Grandma home in pieces. Asterisk. Maya's signature sarcasm. Jazz smiled. Then she threw the phone into the lake, watching the bubbles rise until the water stilled. Gamma took the wheel. Ready. Jazz looked back once at the burning ruins of the old world, then forward to the horizon where the monsters waited. Let's go meet the family. Lightning split the sky like a scalpel, illuminating the jagged teeth of the reef ahead. The stolen Coast Guard cutter warden groaned as another 15-foot wave lifted its stern, threatening to flip them onto the razor-sharp coral. Jazz gripped the rail, her knuckles white, the salt water stinging the fresh scar across her ribs, a parting gift from Mnemosyne's Miami outpost. Gamma shouted over the gale, her voice barely audible above the storm's roar. Thermals show 32 hostiles in the compound. Plus, asterisk. A second lightning bolt struck, and in its blinding afterglow, the silhouette of the island's dock burned into Jazz's retinas. The matriarch was gone. In its place floated a black nuclear submarine, its hull marked with Mnemosyne's serpent and brain logo above stenciled letters. Neural Archive, Primary. The message. Jazz's earpiece crackled to life. A child's voice, sweet and sing-song. Sister's here. Grandma says come play. Then the world exploded. The first missile struck the water 10 yards off their starboard side, the concussive force flipping the warden onto its side. Jazz's head slammed against the console as seawater rushed in, her last coherent thought before blackness. They were waiting for us. The jungle. Jazz woke face down in wet sand, her mouth full of blood and salt. Gamma dragged her into the tree-line just as automated gunfire chewed apart the beach where she'd lain. The jungle was a living nightmare. Vines lashed their arms like whips, and the air reeked of rotting mangoes undercut with the acrid tang of chemical runoff. Above them, 12 unmanned security towers tracked their movement, the barrels of railguns humming as they charged. Too easy, Gamma muttered, wiping blood from her split lip. The front gates of the compound stood wide open. The banquet. Inside, a single table stretched the length of a football field, set for 32. Each porcelain plate held a severed human finger, the Mnemosyne tracker rings still glinting on rotting flesh. At the head of the table sat a girl no older than 8, her face a mirror of Jazz's childhood photos. She sipped mango juice through a striped straw. Generation 3 welcomes you. She gestured to the empty chairs. Don't worry, the others are downstairs. Gamma's knife was at the girl's throat in a flash. What the hell are you? The child smiled, unblinking. The upgrade. Then the floor vanished beneath them. The descent. The elevator dropped for 3 full minutes, the temperature plunging with every second. When the doors opened, Jazz's breath fogged in the sudden Arctic chill. Before them stretched a cavernous lab, its walls lined with hundreds of glass tanks. Each held a nightmare. Not clones. Hybrids. One creature had Jazz's eyes but the president's jawline. Another combined Gamma's scars with Maya's tattoos. A third had Darius's smirk stitched onto a child's face. At the room's center stood a vat the size of a school bus, its murky fluid bubbling around a shadowy mass. The little girl pressed a button. Grandma's masterpiece. With a hiss of hydraulics, the vat drained, revealing a perfect youthful Darius, his skin glowing with unnatural vitality. His eyelids fluttered open. Hello, daughters. The truth. The restraints were diamond filament, unbreakable even by Gamma's augmented strength. Jazz thrashed as the neural probe descended from the ceiling, its needle-tipped arms glinting under surgical lights. Darius, but not Darius, stroked her hair. "You'll thank me when the pain stops." Across the lab, Gamma roared as nurses prepped her for surgery, their scalpels reflecting in her terrified eyes. The little girl giggled, holding up a neural drive labeled Jazzomega. "We're gonna be so much better than humans." Jazz spat blood onto the pristine floor. "What are you?" The answer came from the shadows. "Evolution." Grandma stepped into the light. Her body was a grotesque fusion of the First Lady's limbs, Gamma's spinal implants, and the matriarch's face, stitched together like a living quilt. She raised a bone saw. "Let's make you perfect." The escape. Jazz bit through her own tongue. The pain shocked her system awake just as the first probe pierced her spine. She bucked hard enough to snap the left restraint, and grabbed Gamma's fallen neurotoxin pistol. The shots. First round asterisk took Grandma between her mismatched eyes. The creature screeched, its stitches bursting as it collapsed. Second round asterisk shattered the hybrid vat. Darius Prime screamed as his prototype body dissolved into sludge. Third round asterisk hit the reactor's cooling system. Alarms wailed as the room began to overheat. Gamma, half-conscious, triggered the EMP grenade. Lights exploded as the machines died. The revelation. The elevator was dead. As flames spread, the little girl blocked their exit, her eyes now glowing Mnemosyne blue. "You can't kill me," she whispered. "I'm already in the satellites." Jazz pressed the pistol to her forehead. "Then I'll just have to kill everything." She fired. The explosion started deep below, swallowing the island whole. The beach. 1 month later, Jazz stood on a different shore, watching the tide erase her footprints. No more trackers. No more clones. Just Gamma beside her, the sunrise painting her scars gold. The news had called it a rogue missile test. The world moved on. The choice. Jazz felt the syringe in her pocket, the V7.0 antidote Gamma had carried since Denver. She held it up to the light. The label peeled back under her thumb, revealing older text. Neural reset. For original use only. Gamma met her eyes. "Your call." For a heartbeat, Jazz imagined it, a world where she forgot the labs, the screams, the weight of the pistol in her hand. Then she snapped the syringe in half. The ocean kept breathing.